The wind this afternoon carried a very strange scent. Not the pungent smell of damp earth after summer showers, nor the acrid smoke of forest fires sparked by lightning on the other side of the mountain. It was a sharp, dry scent that pierced through every muscle and fiber. In the dimly lit limestone cave, where the central fire danced and crackled, the scarred bear tribe curled up in their rough animal skins. Ka, a young hunter with eyes as bright as a panther's, shivered slightly. The deerskin draped over his shoulders seemed insufficient to ward off an invisible force seeping into his very marrow. It was a cold that, in the 20 falling leaf seasons since his birth, he had never known. The elders of the tribe, those who had survived countless full moons, were also looking at each other with bewildered eyes. The tribe's shaman, a man who always had answers for the phenomena of earth and sky, now merely muttered meaningless sounds in his throat, his sinewy hands hastily warming over the glowing flames. The sky outside the cave entrance was no longer a blue dome dotted with fluffy white clouds, nor was it the thick, viscous black of stormy nights. It bore a dull, heavy, and dense gray, as if the entire atmosphere had been compressed into a massive block of stone hovering right above their heads. The silence was terrifying. Normally, at this hour, the forest would be alive with the calls of gibbons, the chirping of birds seeking roosts, and the rustling of small beasts moving beneath the dry leaves. But today, all of creation seemed to hold its breath. An absolute silence, an ominous quietude, as if the entire wild world foresaw something monumental and frightening about to happen, save for the humans huddled in that stone cave. Ka stepped near the cave entrance, looking up at the sky with curiosity. From within that gray expanse, a tiny, pure white object gently glided down through the air. Ka narrowed his eyes. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was not a feather falling from the sky, for it was far too small and fragile. It was not ash from a distant volcano, for ash was dark gray and carried a scorched odor, whereas this thing was pure and odorless. The tiny white entity fluttered and spiraled on gentle gusts of wind, finally landing perfectly on Ka's rough, scar-crossed back of his hand. He held his breath, reaching out a finger to touch this strange flower of the sky. But in a mere blink, the moment it met the warmth of human skin, the pristine object suddenly vanished. It did not fly away, nor did it shatter. It melted, leaving behind a piercingly cold drop of water that seeped into his pores. Ka jerked his hand back, his eyes wide with astonishment. Water. That white thing had turned into water. But how could water fall from the sky in the form of weightless white petals? The concept of freezing, of water crystals, of snow and ice was entirely absent from his primal brain. To Ka and his tribe, water only existed in babbling brooks, in puddles left after a rain, or pouring down from the sky as soaking wet liquid drops. The phase transition of matter was an unfathomably profound magic that prehistoric thought could not yet grasp. A commotion began to rise from behind. Others in the tribe had stepped out of the cave, lifting their gaunt, soot-smudged faces to the sky. 1 flake, 2 flakes, then 10, then hundreds of pure white specks began to fall, speckling the air. They drifted lazily in the wind, forming a silent, mystical dance. Children reached out to catch the bizarre flowers, shrieking with a mix of delight and shock as they vanished, leaving a sharp, stinging cold on their skin. A few women dropped to their knees, clutching their heads, murmuring fragmented chants of plea. They believed the spirits of the sky were enraged, tearing the clouds apart to punish mankind. The shaman stepped forward, wielding a wooden staff carved with grotesque figures. He waved it wildly in the air, trying to chase away the swarm of white insects that grew thicker by the second. But the sky did not answer their prayers or their attempts to drive it away. The white flakes kept falling, multiplying, thickening. The wind began to howl through the limestone crevices, carrying a bone-chilling frost. Soon enough, the playful laughter of children died down, replaced by wails of freezing distress. The initial curiosity and wonder gave way to a primal fear of a natural phenomenon entirely alien to the tribe's memory. Everyone frantically scrambled back into the cave, huddling around the fire, desperately clinging to the only remaining source of warmth. Ka remained standing there, mesmerized by the sight. The air around him was now a dense, blinding white. Snowflakes swirled, striking his face and eyes, settling in his tangled hair, accumulating on the fur of his deerskin cloak. He realized his teeth were chattering violently. His fingers and toes were growing numb, losing sensation. He understood that this beautiful, silent white substance was not harmless. It carried the breath of death. It was slowly, methodically draining the life and warmth from every living thing it touched. In Ka's primitive mind, the sky was collapsing, not by crashing down in giant boulders, but by burying the earth under a freezing white dust. He abruptly turned and sprinted back into the cave. That night was the longest and most horrifying night in the history of the Scarred Bear tribe. The wind roaring outside the cave sounded like the bellowing of thousands of invisible, colossal beasts. The central fire, usually a blazing heart of life and security, now seemed to tremble and shrink before the encroaching chill. The men continuously snapped dry reserve branches to feed the flames, their eyes etched with sheer anxiety. If the wood ran out, if the fire died, they would all perish. Death would not come from the fangs of a saber-toothed tiger, nor from the tusks of a mammoth, but from the freezing silence of the white dust outside. The entire tribe pressed tightly against one another, skin to skin, sharing every fragile ounce of warmth. They listened to the strange sounds outside. No patter of rain on leaves, no rumbling thunder, only the ear-piercing shriek of the wind and a soft, rustling whisper of millions upon millions of snowflakes relentlessly descending upon the earth. It sounded like the murmurs of a giant deity lulling the entire wilderness into a deep, eternal slumber. In the flickering darkness of the cave, the shaman began to recount an ancient legend, passed down by word of mouth from the first ape men, about an era when the sun was swallowed by a massive monster, and the whole world was submerged in a freezing white fog. No one knew if the story was true, but right now, everything was unfolding exactly like a curse echoing from the past. Ka did not sleep. He stayed awake all night, tightly clutching his wooden spear tipped with razor-sharp flint. The spear had helped him fell dozens of deer and wild boars, but now it was utterly useless against this new enemy. How could one hurl a spear at the sky? How could one stab the cold? For the first time in his life, the warrior instincts of the tribe's fiercest hunter felt completely powerless. When the first difficult light of dawn pierced through the gray clouds, the wind gradually ceased. Silence returned, but it was a silence even more dreadful than the day before. Ka was the first to slowly stand up, taking stiff, hesitant steps toward the cave entrance. The sight that met his eyes froze him in his tracks, as if turned to stone. The world he once knew, the familiar forest with its towering trees, lush green grass, and mossy boulders, had vanished. Completely vanished. In its place was an endless expanse of white, stretching to the horizon. A blinding, agonizing white under the pale sun struggling to rise from behind the mountain range. Every contour of the terrain had been leveled, smoothed over by a thick layer of snow. The ancient trees now looked like grotesque dried skeletons, weighed down by massive white blocks on their branches. The small stream flowing through the valley, where the tribe usually fetched their drinking water, no longer babbled. It had frozen solid, covered in a layer of clear ice that reflected the light like the tens of thousands of tightly shut eyes of a monster. All of creation seemed to have been bleached and frozen in time by a mysterious magic. Ka carefully stepped one foot out of the cave, planting his muscular bare foot onto the crunchy snow. A crisp, dry sound echoed, followed immediately by a freezing sensation that shot from the soles of his feet straight to the top of his head, making him instinctively shudder and pull his foot back. His footprint sank deep into the snow, which reached past his ankle, leaving a stark impression on the perfectly pristine white surface. That was the first footprint of a human stepping into a new era, a footprint touching the cruelty and grandeur of nature. The others in the tribe began to step out, gathering around Ka. They stood in silence, their eyes wide, mouths agape, unable to utter a word in the face of the world's monumental transformation. The children, after a night of terror, timidly bent down to scoop up a handful of fluffy snow. The icy snow clumped together, then quickly melted into water as the warmth from their small hands transferred to it. A few tried bringing the snow to their mouths to taste it. Its flavor was bland and freezing, but it somewhat quenched their thirst. However, behind the awe and the surreal beauty of that white world, a brutal reality immediately set in. The shaman pointed toward the forest, his voice trembling as he uttered sounds warning of peril. Where was the food? The berry bushes were buried under thick snow. Where had the herds of deer fled to escape the cold? How could they travel and hunt when their bare feet could not endure the biting frost for even half a day? Ka looked down at his feet, already flushed red from the cold, then at the members of his tribe shivering and huddling in their thin animal skins. This first snowfall was not merely a strange phenomenon, it was a warning bell. The most grueling survival challenge nature had ever posed to mankind. The sky had changed, the earth had changed, and to continue surviving in this harsh, white world, humanity would be forced to change as well. They would have to learn to craft thicker clothing, learn to keep a fire burning endlessly, learn to traverse the snow, and learn to read the tracks of wild beasts imprinted on the white surface. They did not know that the moment the first snowflakes fell and melted on Ka's rough hand was also the moment that marked the beginning of an ice age that would last for thousands of years. Memories of the first time seeing snow would be carved deep into their subconscious, passed from one generation to the next around flickering fires in dark caves, becoming myths about the time the sky fell and the gods of the cold began their reign over the earth. Seeing snow for the first time, prehistoric humans permanently lost their innocence toward a benign nature, entering into the greatest battle for survival in history that would shape humanity. This afternoon, standing before the White Valley, Ka took a deep breath. The freezing air rushed into his lungs, turning into a plume of white smoke as he exhaled. He tightened his grip on his wooden spear, his eyes staring resolutely straight ahead into the desolate, frigid world. The first snow had fallen, bringing death and fear, but at the same time, it ignited the flame of the will to survive, of the resilience and infinite power of adaptation sprouting within the hot blood of the very first humans on this earth. And just like that, beneath the shadow of the Ice Age, humanity began to write its most epic chapter upon the pristine, freezing, yet deeply proud white pages